The snowfall came down like a white curtain, swallowing the Alaskan mountain range on Christmas Eve. Thick flakes descended in endless waves, each one adding to the suffocating blanket that transformed the rugged peaks into ghostly silhouettes. The wind howled through the valleys with a sound like wounded animals, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like tiny needles. SEAL Team Echo 7 moved through the blizzard in tactical formation, their white winter camouflage blending with the environment. 6 operators, each a veteran of countless missions, pushed forward through knee-deep snow toward their objective, a militant compound nestled in the mountains near the Canadian border. Intelligence indicated 3 hostages held inside, Americans captured during a pipeline inspection 2 weeks prior. At the rear of the formation, struggling slightly with her medical pack, was Elara Hayes. The team medic stood 5'6", thin-framed with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed perpetually distant. She moved with quiet efficiency, never complaining about the weight of her gear or the brutal cold that had dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. "Keep up, Hayes," barked Lieutenant Marcus Drake, the team leader. His tone carried the dismissive edge she had grown accustomed to over the past 8 months since joining Echo 7. "Copy," she responded softly, adjusting the straps of her medical pack. Behind her visor, Sergeant Tyler Morrison exchanged glances with Corpsman Jake Patterson. The unspoken message was clear. She doesn't belong out here, They had voiced their concerns to Drake repeatedly during training. Hayes was competent with trauma care, exceptional even, but she lacked the aggressive edge they expected in the field. She was too quiet, too withdrawn, never joining their pre-mission banter or post-operation celebrations. What they didn't know was that Elara preferred the silence. Inside that medical pack, beneath layers of bandages, plasma bags, and surgical tools, lay something she had sworn never to touch again. Something wrapped in thermal cloth, disassembled into precise components, hidden where no one would think to look. The team reached a ridge overlooking the compound at 2,147 hours. Through the swirling snow, they could make out the dark structures below. 3 buildings arranged in a U-shape with sentries visible despite the storm. "Eyes on target," Drake whispered into his radio. 6 tangos outside, unknown inside, thermals picking up heat signatures in the eastern building. "That's where they're keeping them," said Patterson, adjusting his scope. The plan was straightforward: breach from the north, neutralize resistance, extract the hostages before the storm made helicopter extraction impossible. They had a 4-hour window before the blizzard intensified, to the point where even their Night Stalker pilots wouldn't risk the flight. As they began their descent, Elara felt something familiar stir in her chest. Not fear, she had moved beyond fear years ago. It was recognition. She had seen terrain like this before, fought in storms like this before. Her fingers unconsciously traced the outline of her medical scissors, a nervous habit that anchored her to her new identity. "You're just a medic now." She reminded herself. "That other person is gone." But the mountains, ancient and knowing, seemed to whisper otherwise. They remembered what she had been. They always remembered. Echo 7 moved down the slope with practiced precision, using the terrain and reduced visibility to their advantage. The compound loomed larger with each step, its lights creating yellow halos in the falling snow. Elara stayed in formation, her medical training making her hyper-aware of potential hazards: the unstable snowpack, the risk of frostbite, the way Morrison was favoring his left leg from an old injury. They reached the perimeter fence at 2,219 hours. Drake signaled, and Patterson began cutting through the chain link with hydraulic shears. The sound was masked by the wind, but Elara felt her pulse quicken. Something was wrong. The compound was too quiet, the sentries too relaxed, their patrol patterns too predictable. "This is a trap," her instinct screamed. But she was just the medic. No one asked for her tactical assessment. They breached the northern building without resistance. Inside, they found it empty except for a table with playing cards and half-eaten meals, still warm. On the wall, someone had spray-painted a message in crude English: "Welcome, SEALs." "Abort." Drake's voice cracked with urgency. "Fall back to..." The explosion cut off his words. The southern wall erupted in a ball of fire and smoke, throwing 2 operators across the room. Elara was moving before the debris stopped falling, her medical training overriding everything else. She reached Corporal David Chen first, checking his breathing, scanning for injuries. "Compound fracture, left tibia," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Patterson, I need you to." Machine gun fire ripped through the building from multiple directions. The SEALs returned fire, but they were pinned down, caught in a kill box expertly designed to neutralize their training and equipment. "We're compromised," Drake shouted into his radio. "Echo 7 to base, we need immediate..." Static. The radio was jammed, its signal drowned in electronic interference. Outside, Elara could hear them. Enemy combatants taking positions on the high ground, their communications clear and coordinated. These weren't amateurs. This was a professional force that had been waiting, studying American tactics, learning their patterns. "Hayes, stay with Chen," Drake ordered. "Everyone else, we're pushing east to the ridgeline. It's our only shot." They fought their way out of the building, dragging Chen between them, Elara applying a tourniquet, even as bullets chewed up the snow around them. The storm had intensified, visibility dropping to less than 50 feet. Under other circumstances, that would have been an advantage. Now, it was just another factor working against them. They reached a narrow canyon carved into the mountainside, its walls offering temporary cover. Drake assessed their situation with grim efficiency. 3 wounded, ammunition at 60%, no communications, and an unknown number of hostiles with superior positioning. "Hayes," he said, his tone almost apologetic, "can you keep them alive?" She met his eyes, seeing the weight of command crushing down on him. "I'll do everything I can." What she didn't say was that keeping them alive might require more than medicine. It might require becoming someone she had buried 3 years ago. Someone who had disappeared after a mission went catastrophically wrong, after she had failed to save the people who mattered most. The mountains whispered again, and this time, Elara listened. The canyon offered illusion of safety that lasted exactly 12 minutes. At 2,247 hours, pressure-triggered mines detonated at both ends, sealing them in with avalanches of snow and rock. The explosions echoed off the walls, creating a sound like thunder trapped in a bottle. Drake tried the radio again, static. He tried the emergency beacon, nothing. The enemy had them locked in an electronic cage, cutting them off from help, from hope, from everything except the slowly tightening noose. "They knew our extraction point," Morrison said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "They knew our route. How the hell did they know?" "Doesn't matter now," Drake replied. But his jaw was clenched. They had been betrayed or predicted, and the result was the same. They were going to die in this frozen canyon unless something changed. The temperature continued to drop. Elara watched her breath crystallize in front of her face, saw the way frost was forming on their equipment. At these temperatures, exposed skin would freeze in minutes. They couldn't stay here, but they couldn't leave. A perfect trap. Chen was stable for now, but Specialist Ryan Walsh had taken shrapnel in his side, and his breathing was becoming labored. She worked on him with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding entry wounds by touch in the darkness, applying pressure, administering morphine. "You're good at this," Walsh said through gritted teeth. "Real good. Why'd someone like you end up in the field?" "Long story," she replied, avoiding his eyes. "We've got time," he said with a bitter laugh. "Looks like we've got nothing but time." From above, searchlights suddenly blazed to life, cutting through the storm like white spears. Whoever had planned this ambush was thorough. They had portable generators, thermal optics, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to finish what they started. "Contact high!" Patterson screamed, opening fire at shadows on the canyon rim. Return. Fire came immediately, forcing the SEALs to press against the canyon walls. Rock chips exploded where bullets struck, mixing with the snow in a deadly confetti. Elara found herself pressed behind a boulder, her medical pack beside her. Her hands moved automatically, checking supplies, but her eyes were drawn upward, calculating distances, wind speed, angles of attack. Old habits, old instincts. She closed her eyes, trying to push them away. She was a medic. She saved lives. That other life, those other skills, they belonged to someone who had failed when it mattered most. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. Another canyon, another storm, 3 years ago. Her spotter, Daniel, laughing at something she had said, then turning serious as they tracked their target. The way his head had simply disappeared when the counter-sniper found them first. The way his blood had looked against the snow, so impossibly red against all that white. She had frozen then. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, she had been paralyzed, unable to shoot, unable to save him. 3 seconds. In combat, that was an eternity. When she finally took the shot that avenged Daniel, something inside her broke. She had left that canyon with her spotter in a body bag and her will to fight buried under a mountain of guilt. Asterisk, never again. Asterisk, she had promised herself. Asterisk, never again will I hold a weapon. Never again will I be responsible for someone's death or failure to prevent it. Asterisk. But now, listening to her teammates' labored breathing, seeing the desperation in their eyes, she wondered if her promise had been naive. Sometimes saving lives required more than bandages and plasma. Sometimes it required taking lives. A bullet struck the boulder she was hiding behind, sending fragments into her cheek. She felt the warm trickle of blood, tasted copper, and something inside her, something she had kept locked away in chains, began to stir. The situation deteriorated with brutal efficiency. By 23:15 hours, they were down to their last magazines. Chen had developed signs of shock despite her treatment, and Walsh's breathing had become a wet, rattling sound that Elara recognized as a developing pneumothorax. "Chest seal," she muttered, digging through her pack. "Where's my damn?" An explosion rocked the canyon, this one closer than the others. Enemy combatants were using grenades to flush them from cover, herding them like animals toward slaughter. Drake's face had taken on the gray pallor of a man who sees the end approaching. "Hayes," he said quietly, pulling her aside. "When this goes bad, I want you to stay behind. Hide in the rocks. Maybe they won't find you. Maybe." "Sir, that's an order." His voice broke. "You're not combat rated. You shouldn't even be here. This isn't your fight." Morrison appeared beside them, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "We're done, LT. No rescue. No chance. We make our stand here. Take as many of them with us as we can." The other SEALs gathered, their faces showing resignation more than fear. They were warriors, trained to accept death as an occupational hazard, but acceptance didn't make it easier, didn't make the thought of dying in this frozen canyon any less bitter. "Sir," Elara said, her voice cutting through the howling wind, "I need everyone to take cover in the deepest part of the crevice, now." Drake stared at her. "What? Why?" "Because I'm going to need room to work." "Hayes, this isn't the time for—" "That's not a request, Lieutenant." The authority in her voice was so unexpected that Drake actually took a step back. "Get them into cover. Give me 2 minutes." Something in her eyes made him obey. Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was the way she held herself suddenly straighter, colder, like a different person wearing Hayes' skin. He signaled to the others, and they retreated deeper into the crevice, confused but compliant. Elara knelt beside her medical pack, her hand steady despite everything. She unbuckled the main compartment, then the hidden secondary pocket beneath. Her fingers found familiar shapes wrapped in thermal cloth. Asterisk. "You swore." Asterisk. A voice in her head whispered. Asterisk. "You swore you'd never touch it again." Asterisk. "I know," she whispered back, "but I also swore I'd never let another teammate die if I could prevent it." She began unwrapping the components, the receiver, the barrel, the stock, the scope. Each piece was perfectly maintained, wrapped separately, preserved against the cold. It took 90 seconds to assemble the rifle, her hands moving with muscle memory that transcended thought. When she was done, she held in her hands a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. A custom sniper rifle built for extreme cold weather operations, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, with a scope designed for zero visibility conditions. The rifle had no serial number, no official designation. It had been built for one person, for one purpose. It had been built for Snow Wraith. Behind her, she heard Morrison's sharp intake of breath. "Jesus Christ, how did you?" Elara stood, slinging the rifle across her back. She pulled off her medical gloves, revealing hands scarred from years of training, from countless hours on ranges most SEALs would never see. "My name is Elara Hayes," she said quietly. "That part is true. But before I was a medic, I was something else." Drake emerged from the crevice, staring at her like she was a ghost. "Who are you?" She met his eyes, and in that moment, he saw past the quiet medic who couldn't keep up on marches, past the woman they had dismissed as inadequate. He saw a predator, cold and patient, who had been hiding in plain sight. 3 years ago, she said, "they called me Snow Wraith. I was part of a unit that officially doesn't exist. We operated in places you've never heard of, eliminating targets no one else could reach." "Bullshit," Morrison said. "Snow Wraith is a legend, a ghost story. Most legends start with truth." She checked the rifle's action, the familiar weight settling into her hands like greeting an old friend. "I left that life after a mission went wrong. After I failed my spotter, I swore I'd never kill again." "And now?" Drake asked. Elara looked up at the canyon rim, where searchlights swept through the storm, where death waited with patient certainty. "Now I'm going to break that promise. Because Christmas, 3 years ago, I let someone die. This Christmas, I won't make the same mistake." She moved to the canyon wall and began to climb. The rock face was treacherous, covered in ice and exposed to the full fury of the storm. But Elara climbed with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her fingers found holds by instinct, her body remembering lessons learned in mountains around the world. Behind her, the SEALs watched in stunned silence. This wasn't the hesitant medic who struggled with her pack. This was someone else entirely, someone who moved through the deadly environment like it was her natural habitat. She reached a ledge 40 feet up, sheltered by an overhang but with a clear sight line to the canyon rim. Perfect. She settled into position, the rifle becoming an extension of her body, and began her breathing exercises. Through the scope, the world transformed. The storm was still there, but her training taught her to see through it, to read the patterns of wind and snow, to find the gaps where a bullet could travel true. She spotted the first target, a man with a thermal scope, scanning the canyon floor for movement. Range, approximately 800 meters. Wind, gusting 25 to 30 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature, -23 degrees. Snow, heavy, but moving in predictable patterns. Any conventional sniper would say the shot was impossible. Elara knew better. Her finger found the trigger, caressing it with professional intimacy. She breathed out slowly, letting her heart rate drop, waiting for the moment between beats when her body was perfectly still. The rifle coughed, a suppressed sound swallowed by the storm. 800 meters away, the man with the thermal scope dropped without a sound, a hole where his left eye used to be. Below, Morrison grabbed Drake's arm. "Did you see that? In this storm?" Elara had already acquired her second target, a machine gunner setting up a position to strafe the canyon. Range, 900 meters. She adjusted for wind, for the bullet's drop, for factors no one else could quantify. Another shot. Another body. The enemy forces began to react, but they didn't know where the shots were coming from. In the storm, the suppressed rifle reports were ghost sounds, impossible to triangulate. They began firing wildly, wasting ammunition on shadows. Elara remained perfectly calm, acquiring targets with mechanical precision. A squad leader barking orders, eliminated. A radio operator calling for reinforcements, silenced. A grenadier preparing to rain death on the canyon, stopped cold. Each shot was a paragraph in a language only she spoke, written in gunpowder and gravity, grammar and death. This was what she had been created for, trained for, the skill that had once made her the most feared sniper in the military's shadow programs. Patterson, watching through his own scope, could barely comprehend what he was seeing. She's shooting through gaps in the storm. How is she predicting the wind? Because she's done this before, Drake said quietly. In places where one shot meant the difference between a successful mission and an international incident. Jesus, the stories about Snow Wraith, they were all true. On her ledge, Elara felt the familiar coldness settling into her bones. Not from the temperature, but from the act itself. Each time she pulled the trigger, a piece of the person she had tried to become, the healer, the medic, the woman who saved lives, died a little. But each shot also kept her teammates alive, kept them fighting. Asterisk. This is the price, asterisk, she thought. Asterisk. This is what it costs to save them. I become what I swore I'd never be again. Asterisk. She spotted a cluster of 3 combatants taking cover behind a generator. Difficult shot, moving targets, poor visibility, crosswind. She adjusted her breathing, calculated, and squeezed. The bullet struck the generator, piercing the fuel tank. The resulting explosion took all 3 combatants out of the fight and plunged a section of the canyon rim into darkness. Below, the SEALs began to rally. With the enemy's advantage disappearing shot by shot, Drake organized a counterattack. They moved with renewed purpose, using the covering fire Elara provided to advance on positions they couldn't have reached before. Morrison reached the canyon wall and looked up at her position. Through his scope, he could see her outlined against the storm, utterly still except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. She looked like a statue carved from ice, beautiful and terrible. "Snow Wraith," he whispered, finally understanding the legend. "You were real all along." With the enemy's coordination shattered, Echo 7 began their counter-offensive. Drake led them in a flanking maneuver that used the canyon walls for cover, while Elara's overwatch eliminated any combatant foolish enough to expose themselves. "Target left! You're 2 o'clock!" Drake called over the team frequency. Before anyone could respond, Elara had already taken the shot. A gunner spun backward off the canyon rim, his weapon clattering down into the darkness. The enemy forces were in disarray. They had planned for a besieged group of trapped SEALs, not for a phantom sniper who could kill through a blizzard. Their tactical advantages, superior positioning, numerical superiority, prepared defenses evaporated under her methodical precision. Chen, despite his injury, was now providing covering fire with his sidearm. Walsh, his chest seal holding, had resumed his role as designated marksman. Even wounded, professional warriors like them were deadly when given hope. "On your 6, Patterson yelled. Elara shifted, acquiring a new target, a combatant trying to flank their position from the north, range 1,000 meters. The shot required threading the bullet through a gap in the storm, between rock formations, during a wind gust. She took the shot anyway. The man fell, and Morrison let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "That's impossible. That's physically impossible." "Welcome to what she does," Drake said, his respect evident. "This is why Snow Wraith was a ghost story. Because what she can do shouldn't be possible." From her position, Elara could see the battlefield with terrible clarity. The enemy had committed approximately 20 combatants to this ambush, confident that numbers and positioning would be enough. They hadn't planned for her. No one ever planned for her. Her shot count was up to 17 confirmed kills. In another life, before she became a medic, she would have felt nothing. Now, each life she took carved a hollow space in her chest. But she kept shooting, because the alternative was watching her teammates die. The enemy commander must have realized they were losing. Elara spotted him through the scope, a tall man with gray hair, standing beside a vehicle-mounted heavy machine gun. He was organizing a retreat, trying to salvage what remained of his force. "Echo 7, they're pulling back," Drake reported. "Hayes, can you interdict?" She could. She adjusted for the extreme range 1,200 meters and for the fact that her target was moving. The wind had shifted, coming now from the east, and the snow was falling in sheets that would deflect a lesser shooter's bullet. Elara wasn't a lesser shooter. She breathed, aimed, fired. The heavy machine gun's ammunition belt detonated from her bullet's impact, creating a secondary explosion that destroyed the vehicle and sent the enemy commander diving for cover. The retreat became a rout, combatants abandoning equipment in their haste to escape. "They're running!" Patterson shouted. "We're actually going to make it!" But Elara remained tense, scanning for threats. Something was wrong. An ambush this sophisticated, this well-planned, wouldn't end with a simple retreat. There was another piece, another move. Then she saw it, a thermal signature larger than the others, hanging back from the fleeing combatants. A portable surface-to-air missile launcher, aimed not at them but at the sky. They were waiting for the rescue helicopter. "Drake," she called over the radio, "they have a SAM. When our extraction arrives, we see it," he replied grimly. "But we can't reach it. Can you?" Could she? The target was 1,500 meters away, partially obscured by terrain, in the worst weather conditions imaginable. Even for her, it was a nearly impossible shot. "I'll find out," she said. Elara studied the target through her scope, calculating angles that existed only in her mind. The SAM team consisted of 2 operators, both wearing heavy winter gear that made accurate identification of vital zones nearly impossible. They were positioned behind a snow berm that provided excellent cover from ground fire. But she wasn't on the ground. The wind howled, throwing snow in chaotic patterns. She watched it, learning its rhythm, the way it moved in waves and eddies around the canyon. To anyone else, it would seem random. To her, trained in remote mountains by instructors who had forgotten more about wind reading than most snipers would ever learn, it was a language. She spoke that language fluently. Range, 1,518 meters. Elevation, approximately 200 feet. Wind, variable, but cycling through a pattern every 8 to 12 seconds. Temperature, dropping toward -30. And the target was not stationary. One of the SAM operators was adjusting equipment, moving in and out of her sight line. Hayes, Drake's voice crackled in her earpiece. Exfil ETA 15 minutes. If you can't take the shot. Quiet, she said softly. She needed to think, to calculate, to become one with the weapon and the environment. This was what Snow Wraith had been famous for, the impossible shots, the ones that defied physics and probability. But those had all been in her past life, when killing was her only purpose. Asterisk. Can I still do this? Asterisk, she wondered. Asterisk. Have I lost the edge by trying to become something softer? Asterisk. Then she remembered Walsh's labored breathing, Chen's pale face, the way Morrison had looked at her when he thought they were all going to die. She remembered Daniel, her spotter, and the promise she had made over his grave. Never again would she fail to protect the people who depended on her. The wind shifted, and in that moment, Elara saw her opportunity. The pattern was revealing itself, showing her the narrow window when the bullet would travel true. She had perhaps 3 seconds to take the shot. She exhaled completely, emptying her lungs, finding that perfect stillness between heartbeats. The rifle became a part of her nervous system, an extension of her will. The scope's reticle settled on the SAM operator's center mass, accounting for wind, gravity, the Coriolis effect, and factors that existed only in her trained intuition. She pulled the trigger. The bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, carving through the storm like a hot knife through paper. For 1.8 seconds, it flew through a 3-dimensional space of wind and snow, its trajectory determined by Elara's calculations. And something that went beyond calculation, the intuitive understanding that separated competent snipers from legends. 1,500 meters away, the SAM operator jerked backward, the missile launcher slipping from his grip. His partner dove for cover, abandoning the weapon. Target neutralized, Elara reported, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Below, the SEALs erupted in amazed profanity. Patterson kept saying impossible over and over, like a prayer. Morrison was laughing, the sound slightly unhinged. Even Drake, usually unflappable, looked shaken. That was the longest shot I've ever seen, Chen said from his stretcher. In these conditions? That should be impossible. It was, Walsh agreed, but she did it anyway. That's why she's the legend. Elara began breaking down the rifle, her movements automatic. Now that the adrenaline was fading, she felt the weight of what she had done settling onto her shoulders. 21 confirmed kills in less than an hour. 21 people who would never go home, never see another Christmas. She had saved her team, but the price was measured in souls, both theirs and hers. Hayes, get down here, Drake ordered. Exfil is inbound. She descended the rock face, her body moving on autopilot, while her mind retreated to a quiet place. When she reached the canyon floor, the team was waiting. They looked at her differently now. Not with dismissal or casual disregard, but with the careful respect accorded to predators. She was no longer Hayes, the medic who couldn't keep up. She was Snow Wraith, the legend they had thought was just a story. Morrison approached, holding something. I think this belongs to you, he said, offering his team patch, the SEAL Trident, worn and faded from years of service. I can't take that, she said. I'm not. Yes, you are. He pressed it into her hand. You've earned this 100 times over, ma'am. The title ma'am was weighted with meaning. It was acknowledgement, apology, and acceptance all in one word. In the distance, they could hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades cutting through the storm. Their extraction was coming, bringing them out of this frozen hell, They were going to survive. But Elara felt no triumph, only a deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She had done what was necessary, but necessity had never been much comfort. The Black Hawk descended through the storm like a mechanical angel, its spotlight cutting through the darkness. The pilot was threading an impossible needle landing in a narrow canyon during near whiteout conditions, but Night Stalker pilots were trained for impossible. As they loaded Chen and Walsh onto stretchers, Drake pulled Elara aside. Around them, the team was securing the perimeter, but their attention kept drifting back to her. Questions hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. "All right," Drake said. "Before we get on that bird, I need to know. Who are you really?" Elara looked at the rifle case in her hands, then at the canyon walls that had witnessed both her resurrection and her damnation. "You want the truth? That would be preferable." She took a breath, tasting snow and gunpowder. "My operational name was Elara Frost, call sign Snow Wraith. I was part of an off-books unit called Arctic Shadow. You won't find it in any database, because officially, we never existed. Our mission was deep cover elimination of high-value targets in extreme cold weather environments, places where conventional forces couldn't operate, where deniability was paramount." Morrison had drifted close enough to hear. "How many missions?" 47 confirmed operations over 4 years. 238 confirmed kills. The numbers fell from her lips like stones. "I operated in Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia, the Himalayas, anywhere it was cold enough that most snipers couldn't function." "But you could," Patterson said, his voice awed. "I was built for it. Trained from the age of 19 by instructors who had learned their craft in places most people couldn't find on a map. They taught me to read wind in a snowstorm, to shoot through gaps in blizzards, to survive temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in minutes." "What happened 3 years ago?" Drake asked. "Why did you disappear?" The question she had known was coming, the one she still had nightmares about. December 23rd, 3 years ago. Mission in the Brooks Range, Alaska. Target was a rogue intelligence officer selling secrets to foreign powers. My spotter was Daniel Crawford. He was also my fiancé, though that was against regulations. Her voice remained steady, but her hands tightened on the rifle case. "We had been tracking the target for 2 days in a blizzard similar to this one. We finally got our shot, but there was a counter-sniper team we didn't know about. They found us first." The wind howled, filling the silence as the team waited. Daniel was on the spotting scope when the bullet hit. It was instantaneous. He didn't suffer, but I froze. For 3 seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't shoot back. In our world, 3 seconds is an eternity. "But you did shoot eventually," Morrison said. "Yes. I eliminated both counter-snipers and completed the mission. Then I carried Daniel's body 15 miles through the storm to our extraction point. By the time I arrived, I had severe frostbite and had been awake for 72 hours straight." She met Drake's eyes. "After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't look through a scope without seeing Daniel. Couldn't pull a trigger without feeling like I had failed him. So I left. Changed my name, went through medic training, and swore I would spend the rest of my life saving people instead of killing them. Until tonight," Drake said quietly. "Until tonight." She looked at each of them in turn. "I let you all dismiss me, underestimate me, because it was easier than being what I used to be. But when it came down to it, when you needed someone to get you out of that trap, I couldn't let you die. Not when I had the skills to prevent it." Patterson shook his head in wonder. 238 kills. "You're one of the most lethal snipers in American history, and you've been carrying our medical gear and taking our shit for 8 months. Because I deserved it," she said. "Because I failed when it mattered most. Because every life I save as a medic is one small payment on a debt I can never fully repay." The helicopter's crew chief appeared. "Sir, we need to lift off now. Storm's getting worse." Drake nodded, then looked back at Elara. "For what it's worth, Hayes or Frost, or Snow Wraith, or whoever you choose to be, you didn't fail us tonight. You saved us, and that counts for something." "Does it?" she asked. 21 people died on my orders. 21 people who won't see their families this Christmas. Does saving 6 lives justify taking 21? "In combat," Morrison said, "you don't get to choose clean victories. You choose who lives. We live because of you. That's not failure. That's what heroes do." She wanted to believe him. But as they boarded the helicopter and lifted off into the storm, leaving the canyon behind, Elara stared at her hands and saw only blood. They were 3 minutes into the flight when the alarm screamed. "Missile lock!" the pilot shouted. "Someone's painting us!" "But we eliminated the SAM team," Patterson said. Elara was already moving to the helicopter's door. Through the storm, she could see it. A second launch platform, hidden further up the mountain, its tracking radar already locked on their aircraft. "They had a backup," she said. "Smart." The pilot banked hard, deploying countermeasures, flares that bloomed like angry flowers in the night. But Elara knew the specifications of modern SAM systems. The missile would ignore the flares, tracking the helicopter's heat signature with ruthless precision. "Can you evade?" Drake asked. "Not in this storm," the pilot replied. "Best bet is to put down and hope." "Negative," Elara cut in. She turned to Drake. "Chen and Walsh need immediate surgery. We can't put down. I need to eliminate the threat." "From a moving helicopter? In a storm?" Morrison looked at her like she was insane. "Even you can't." "Open the door," she commanded, already assembling her rifle. The crew chief stared at her. "Ma'am, that's suicide. The wind shear alone." "I said open the door." Something in her voice, the cold certainty of someone who had done impossible things before, made him obey. The door slid open, and the storm roared in like a living thing, all wind and snow and fury. Elara clipped her safety harness to the aircraft's anchor point and positioned herself in the doorway. The helicopter was banking, turning, the ground a dizzying blur far below. The targeting radar's lock alarm kept screaming, each beep bringing them closer to death. Through her scope, she could see the launcher. Approximately 800 meters, but the range was changing constantly as the helicopter maneuvered. The target was partially obscured by terrain, and both she and it were in motion. The wind was chaotic, the visibility near zero, and she had one shot before the missile launched. This was beyond impossible. This was suicidal. Asterisk. "But they need you." Asterisk, a voice said, Daniel's voice. "From memories or imagination or somewhere in between." Asterisk. "This is why you were created. This is what all that training was for. Not to die in peace, but to save lives when no one else can." Asterisk. She remembered the first time she had taken an impossible shot, remembered her instructor, a grizzled man with frostbitten scars, telling her, "When the math says you can't make the shot, that's when you stop calculating and start feeling. The rifle knows the way. Trust it." Elara stopped calculating. She felt the wind, felt the helicopter's movement, felt the distance between bullet and target as a physical thing she could manipulate. Her breathing slowed until she existed in the spaces between heartbeats, in that fraction of a second where all motion ceased. She pulled the trigger. The bullet left her rifle and entered a realm of physics that seemed almost mystical. It curved through wind that should have deflected it, passed through gaps in the storm that seemed too small for passage, and found its target with the inevitability of fate. 800 meters away, the SAM launcher's targeting system exploded, the sensitive electronics reduced to slag. The missile, robbed of guidance, fell harmlessly into the snow. The alarm stopped screaming. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then, Patterson broke the silence. Did she just make a moving shot from a moving platform in a blizzard? "Yes," Drake said, his voice filled with something like religious awe. "Yes, she did." Elara slumped against the bulkhead, her strength suddenly gone. The rifle slipped from her trembling fingers, caught by Morrison, before it could fall into the darkness below. She had done it. She had made the shot that shouldn't exist. But God, she was tired. Chen reached out with his good hand, touching her shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply. Walsh, barely conscious, managed a weak smile. Snow Wraith, the legend, real all along. As the helicopter climbed higher, leaving the battle behind, Elara closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Daniel smiling, proud, forgiving. Maybe he had always been there, in the storm, in the mountains, in the spaces between bullets. Maybe he had never really left. Asterisk. "You did good, L. Asterisk," his memory whispered. Asterisk. "You saved them. That's all that matters. Asterisk." "I hope so," she whispered back. "I really hope so." Fort Richardson appeared through the thinning storm at 0547 hours. The base was decorated with Christmas lights, inappropriate, perhaps, given their mission, but a reminder that somewhere beyond the violence, life continued in its normal patterns. The helicopter touched down on the medical facility's pad, where a trauma team was waiting. They rushed Chen and Walsh into surgery while the rest of Echo 7 was checked for injuries and exposure. Elara submitted to examination like everyone else, though her injuries were minor: frostbite on 2 fingers, a cut on her cheek, and exhaustion that went bone deep. She sat in a recovery room, wrapped in thermal blankets, drinking coffee that tasted like salvation. Through the window, she watched the sky lighten, watched Christmas morning arrive in shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world clean and white and impossibly beautiful. Drake entered without knocking, holding 2 steaming cups. He handed her one, then sat down across from her. "Chen's in surgery. They think he'll keep the leg. Walsh has a collapsed lung, but they're optimistic. Everyone else is accounted for and stable." "Good," she said. "That's good." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the dawn. "Command wants to debrief you," Drake said finally. "Questions about who you are, how you have those skills, whether you're still legally dead or, well, it's complicated. I expected as much. They're also talking about reactivating your status, bringing Snow Wraith out of retirement, given what happened tonight." She looked at him sharply. "No, Elara." I said no. Her voice was firm. "Tonight was necessary. But it doesn't mean I want to go back to that life. I'm a medic. That's who I chose to become." Drake studied her face. "You saved us all. You know that, right? Not just by shooting, but by being willing to become something you hate, to protect people you barely know." "I know." She stared into her coffee. "But every shot I took, every person I killed, they chip away at the person I'm trying to be. If I go back to that full time, there won't be anything left worth saving." "So what will you do?" "I'll stay a medic. I'll save lives when I can. And if another situation like tonight happens, if my team needs me to be Snow Wraith again, then I'll do what's necessary. But it won't be my first choice. It'll never be my first choice." Morrison appeared in the doorway, his arm in a sling. Behind him were Patterson and the rest of the team, looking exhausted but alive. "Wanted to thank you before they cart us off to debriefing," Morrison said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For the way we treated you, for underestimating you." "We all are," Patterson added. "You're not just our medic, you're our sister. And if anyone ever questions that again, they answer to us." Elara felt something warm in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Acceptance. Not for who she had been, but for who she was trying to become. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." Patterson held out something. The team patch Morrison had given her earlier, but now mounted on a small plaque with an inscription. "Snow Wraith, Echo 7, Christmas Miracle." "We took a vote," he explained. "You're officially part of the team, if you'll have us." She took the plaque, running her fingers over the engraving. The seal trident gleamed in the morning light, a symbol of brotherhood, of sacrifice, of warriors who chose to protect others even when the cost was high. "I'll have you," she said, surprised to find her eyes wet. "I'd be honored." They stood there together as the sun continued to rise, as Christmas morning spread across the Alaskan wilderness. Somewhere, families were opening presents, children were laughing. People were celebrating the holiday in warmth and safety. They had that safety because of warriors like Echo 7, because of people willing to stand in the frozen darkness, willing to face impossible odds, willing to do terrible things so others wouldn't have to. And sometimes, on very rare occasions, those warriors were saved by someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Someone who had tried to leave violence behind, but found that sometimes saving lives required taking them. Elara Hayes' Snow Wraith stood and walked to the window. In the snow below, she could see her reflection, tired, scarred, but still standing, still fighting, still choosing, every day, to be better than what the world had made her. The mountains in the distance stood silent and knowing, keeping their secrets. They had witnessed her resurrection, her return to a life she thought she'd buried. They knew the truth. Some legends never really die. They just sleep, waiting for the moment when they're needed most. And on Christmas morning, under a sky slowly clearing of storm clouds, one legend had awakened, not to resume a life of killing, but to prove something more important. That even those who walk in darkness can still choose the light. That redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about using it to create a better future. That sometimes, the greatest gift isn't peace, but the strength to protect it. Merry Christmas, she whispered to the dawn, to the mountains, to Daniel's memory. Thank you for letting me save them. In the quiet of her heart, she heard his voice one last time. Asterisk. Merry Christmas, Elle. You did good. You always do good. Asterisk. Number 4. The team filed out, heading to debriefing, to hot showers, to sleep. But first, they walked together through the base, past the Christmas decorations, past the soldiers celebrating the holiday. And when people saw Echo 7, bloodied and exhausted but alive, they nodded with respect. Because they knew, even without knowing the full story, that something significant had happened in those frozen mountains, that lives had been saved by someone extraordinary. That legends sometimes walk among us, hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment. Snow Wraith had returned, if only for one night. And that one night had been enough.